The morning of my wedding, I remember thinking that everything felt too good to be true. Not in a bad way, just in that strange, floaty way where you keep waiting for something to go wrong because nothing ever goes this smoothly in real life. I was 28. Daniel and I had been together 4 years, engaged for one of them. My bridesmaids, Jenna, Priya, and my sister Mackenzie, were crammed into the getting ready suite with me. Curling irons plugged into every outlet. Someone's phone playing music too loud. Mimosas nobody had actually finished because we were all too nervous to drink much. I want to be honest here. I loved Daniel's mother, Carol. From the very first dinner I had with his family, she'd been warm to me. Maybe a little intense. The kind of warm that comes from someone who really wants you to like her, but warm all the same. She texted me recipes. She sent me a birthday card 2 years in a row before I was even officially family. When Daniel proposed, she cried on the phone with me for almost 20 minutes. So when Mackenzie was doing my veil that morning and said, "Carol seems so happy today," I just laughed and said, "She's been happy since the day Daniel told her he was proposing." I didn't think twice about it. I had no reason to. There's a photo from that morning. I didn't notice it until much later, actually, scrolling through everything weeks after the wedding, of Carol standing in the doorway of the suite, watching me get zipped into my dress. Everyone else in the shot is smiling at the camera. Carol's smiling too, technically, but her eyes aren't doing what the rest of her face is doing. I didn't clock it then. You don't clock things like that when you're happy. You only go back and find them later, after someone hands you a reason to look. The ceremony itself was outdoors, string lights, October light turning everything gold. I walked down the aisle and found Daniel's face immediately, the way you're supposed to. And for those few minutes, nothing else in the world existed except him standing there trying not to cry. Carol was in the front row. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, which our guy said as a joke, a little icebreaker line before the real vows, she laughed the loudest out of anyone. When we kissed, she was the first person on her feet clapping. Afterward, during the receiving line, she pulled me into a hug so tight, I felt it in my ribs. "I am so happy," she said into my ear. "You have no idea how happy I am for both of you." I remember thinking, at the time, that it was one of the nicest things anyone said to me that whole day. I told Daniel about it later that night. He smiled and said, "She really does love you, you know." I believed him completely. The reception was at this old barn venue his cousin had found. Fairy lights strung across the rafters, the smell of cut grass and barbecue smoke drifting in through the open doors. Carol's toast came right before ours. She held the microphone with both hands like she was steadying herself, and she talked about the day she met me, how she'd watched her son come alive in a way she said she hadn't seen since he was a little kid, how she used to worry he'd never find someone who saw him the way she did, and how grateful she was that I did. People at my table were dabbing their eyes. My own mother reached over and squeezed my hand. It was, by every measure I had, one of the best moments of my entire life. What I didn't see, what I only found out about later, piecing it together from what people told me afterward, was that sometime between the toasts and the cake cutting, Carol pulled Jenna aside near the drink table. I don't know exactly what was said in that moment. I only know that Jenna went quiet for the rest of the night in a way I noticed, but didn't think much about. I figured she was just tired. Weddings do that to people. All that standing, all that smiling. I had no idea I'd just missed the one moment of the entire day that actually mattered. By 1 a.m., the venue had cleared out, and it was just the 4 of us back in my hotel room. Me still in my dress because I hadn't had the energy to change, Mackenzie already in sweatpants, Priya scrubbing mascara off with a makeup wipe, Jenna sitting cross-legged on the bed with a paper cup of leftover champagne she wasn't really drinking. It was quiet in that specific post-wedding way, the kind of quiet that comes after a day so loud your ears are still ringing a little. We talked about nothing mostly. Whether the DJ had overdone it with the slow songs. Whether my uncle had actually fallen asleep standing up during the bouquet toss. Mackenzie kept trying to pull bobby pins out of my hair and wincing every time one didn't come easily. I remember laughing at something Priya said, feeling that specific kind of tired happy you only get maybe a handful of times in your whole life. And then I noticed Jenna hadn't said much in a while. "You okay?" I asked her. "You've been weirdly quiet since like 10 o'clock. She looked at her cup instead of at me. "Yeah," she said. "I'm fine. She stopped. Started again. "Can I tell you something? And you have to promise you're not going to make me feel like a horrible person for telling you." The room got quieter than it already was. Mackenzie stopped pulling pins out of my hair. "Okay," I said slowly. You're scaring me a little. Jenna finally looked up. It's not. Nothing happened. Nobody did anything. It's just something I heard tonight. And I've been sitting on it for hours because I didn't know if I should say anything, or if I should just let it go. But I keep thinking that if I don't tell you, and you find out some other way later, you're gonna wonder why I didn't. Jenna. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. What happened? She set the cup down on the nightstand very carefully, like she needed a second to figure out how to start. It was during the toasts. Right before Carol's, actually. I went to get another drink, and she was over by the bar area, and I don't think she saw me at first. She was talking to your Aunt Diane. And I wasn't trying to listen, I promise. I was just standing right there waiting for the bartender. Okay, I said. My chest had gone tight in a way I couldn't explain yet, because I didn't even know what was coming. She didn't say anything mean. Exactly, Jenna said. It wasn't like she wasn't trashing you, but she said something like, I hope this works out the way everyone thinks it will. And Diane kind of laughed, like, of course it will. And Carol just said, I mean it. I've seen this before. I just hope I'm wrong this time. The room had gone completely silent. Even Priya's makeup wipe stopped moving. And then a minute later she came up on stage and gave that whole toast, Jenna said quietly. The one that made everyone cry. And I couldn't stop thinking about it the rest of the night. It didn't match. And I didn't know if I should tell you, because maybe it's nothing. Maybe she was talking about something totally different. But you don't think that, I said. It wasn't a question. Jenna looked at me, and for the first time all night, her face wasn't performing anything. No, she said. I don't think that. If you've ever found out something about your in-laws that changed how you saw them, drop a comment below. And if you want more real family drama stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because it's about to get even more complicated. I didn't cry right away. That's the part that surprises people when I tell this story. I thought I would, but instead I just sat there very still half in my wedding dress, feeling like someone had reached into the day and quietly pulled a thread out of it without me noticing. And now the whole thing was unraveling in slow motion in front of me. Say the exact words again, I said. Please. Exactly. Jenna repeated it, word for word this time, slower. I've seen this before. I just hope I'm wrong this time. I thought about the toast. I used to worry he'd never find someone who saw him the way she did. I thought about the hug at the ceremony. You have no idea how happy I am. I thought about the photo I hadn't even looked at yet, the one from that morning, the one where her smile didn't reach her eyes. Maybe she meant something else. Mackenzie offered carefully, the way you offer someone an out you don't really believe in yourself. Like, maybe she was talking about her own marriage, or something about Diane's kids, not you guys at all. Maybe, I said. But I already knew, in the quiet, tired, 3 a.m. part of my brain that doesn't lie to itself the way the rest of me sometimes does, that it wasn't about someone else. It was about us. It was about me. And for the first time since I'd put on that dress 12 hours earlier, I didn't feel like the happiest person in the room. I felt like I'd just found out the whole day had a second version running underneath it the entire time, one nobody had shown me until now. I didn't sleep much that night. Daniel was down the hall in the groom's suite with his brother, per some tradition his mother insisted on. One last night apart before the marriage officially started, which now felt almost funny to me, like the universe had set up one final barrier between finding out and having to look him in the eye. I lay in that hotel bed still smelling like champagne and hairspray, staring at the ceiling, running the sentence through my head on a loop until it didn't even sound like words anymore. I've seen this before. I just hope I'm wrong this time. Seen what before? Wrong about what? I thought about every dinner I'd ever had with Carol. The recipes she used to text me. Had those been genuine, or was I an assignment she'd given herself? A box she was trying to check? I thought about the birthday cards. I thought about the way she used to ask me questions about my job, my family, my opinions on things, like she was building a file on me. At the time, I'd read all of it as warmth. Now I couldn't stop wondering if it had been something closer to surveillance. Mackenzie fell asleep around 2:30. Priya not long after. Jenna stayed awake with me for a while, not saying much, just sitting there like she felt responsible for what she'd handed me, which I told her more than once she shouldn't. I'd rather know, I said, mostly to convince myself. I would always rather know. Are you going to say something to Daniel? She asked. I don't know yet. I didn't know a lot of things yet. That was the part that scared me most. 12 hours ago, I'd felt like I understood my life completely, and now there was this whole unlit room in it I hadn't known was there. We flew to the coast of Portugal 4 days later for the honeymoon, something we'd been planning for almost a year. White stone villages and cliffside dinners, and a private little rental with a pool that overlooked the water. It should have been perfect. Some of it was. But I noticed myself doing something I'd never done before with Daniel. Watching him. Not suspiciously, not exactly, but studying him in these small moments, trying to figure out what he knew, what he didn't know, what he might already suspect about his own mother that he'd never said out loud to me. On our third day there, we were walking back from a beach after dinner, both of us a little sunburned, both of us happy in that loose, unhurried way you get on a honeymoon, and he reached for my hand and said, "You've been kind of somewhere else the last couple days. You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired. Wedding stuff finally catching up to me, I think." He looked at me a beat too long, like he didn't fully believe it, but he let it go. That was very Daniel. He doesn't push. Sometimes I love that about him. That week, it made me feel oddly alone, like I was the only one carrying something heavy while he walked next to me completely unburdened. That night we had our first real disagreement of married life, if you could even call it that. Nothing dramatic. I snapped at him for taking too long getting ready for dinner, which had nothing to do with dinner and everything to do with the thing I still hadn't told him. He got quiet, hurt in that specific way where he doesn't say he's hurt, he just goes still. We made up before bed, but I remember lying there afterward thinking, this is going to keep happening if I don't say something. I told him 2 nights later. We were sitting on the little balcony of the rental, wine bottle between us, the sound of the water somewhere below in the dark. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "And you actually think about it before you answer, instead of just defending her right away?" He set his glass down slowly. "Okay." I told him what Jenna heard. Not all of it at first. I started with the toast contradiction, the timing, and worked my way to the actual words. I watched his face while I said it, and I saw something flicker across it that I couldn't quite name. Not shock exactly. More like recognition of something he hadn't wanted to look at directly. "She probably meant something totally different," he said, but there wasn't much conviction in it. "She talks like that sometimes. She's dramatic. You know how she gets when she's had a couple glasses of wine." "Daniel," she said, "I hope I'm wrong this time. That's not a throwaway line." Jenna could have misheard something. It was loud in there. So now Jenna's lying? I didn't say she's lying. I said maybe she misheard. "Daniel." I made myself soften my voice, because I could feel this sliding somewhere neither of us wanted it to go, for days into being married. "I'm not trying to make this into a fight. I just need to know if there's something going on with your mom that I don't know about. Something from before me." He was quiet for a long time, looking out at the water instead of at me. "There might be," he finally said, "but it's not really my story to tell." That answer sat in my chest like a stone for the rest of the trip. We got home on a Sunday. The following Thursday was Carol's standing family dinner, something she'd done every month for years, long before I was in the picture, and something I genuinely looked forward to before all of this. That night, walking up to her front door with a bottle of wine we always brought, I felt something I'd never felt walking into that house before. Wariness. Carol answered the door in her usual way, arms out, already talking before she'd even finished opening it, pulling me into a hug that smelled like her perfume and the garlic she'd clearly been cooking with all afternoon. "There's my girl. Look at you, still glowing from the honeymoon." I hugged her back. I smiled. I said all the right things, but I was watching her now in a way I never had before, cataloging every gesture, wondering which ones were real. Dinner went the way it always did. Too much food. Daniel's dad telling the same 3 stories he always tells. Daniel's brother's kids running around underfoot. At one point, Carol reached over and squeezed my hand on the table and said, "I'm just so glad you're really part of this family now." And I felt something twist in my stomach, because 6 days earlier I would have taken that at complete face value, and now I couldn't stop wondering what was underneath it. There was one moment, small, almost nothing, where Carol made an offhand comment about how some marriages take longer to settle than others, directed at nobody in particular, sparked by some story on the news. Nobody else seemed to register it as anything. I felt it land somewhere specific. The car ride home was quiet. Daniel finally said, without me asking, "I know you're noticing everything now. I saw you doing it all night. Can you blame me?" He didn't answer that. He just stared out the windshield, and I understood, in that moment, that whatever Carol's history was, whatever this meant, whatever she'd seen before that she was afraid of seeing again, Daniel already knew more than he was telling me. It took me almost 2 weeks to work up the nerve to ask someone else. I didn't want to go around Daniel exactly, but I needed something more than his half answers. So one afternoon I called his sister Renee, who'd always been easy to talk to, easier than Daniel in a lot of ways, more willing to just say things plainly. I didn't ask her outright at first. We talked about the wedding, about Portugal, normal catch-up. Then I said, carefully, "Can I ask you something about your mom? It might be a weird question." "Sure," Renee said. "Carol's an open book if you ask the right way." I told her, in a general way, what I'd heard. Not naming Jenna, just saying I'd caught wind that Carol had said something on the wedding night that sounded almost like she was bracing for the marriage to fail. Renee went quiet for a second. Then she sighed. The kind of sigh that told me I'd just confirmed something she already suspected I'd eventually find out. "That tracks, honestly," she said. "It's not about you specifically. I mean, I think it kind of is, a little, but it's not really about you." "What do you mean?" "You know, Mom and Dad almost split up when we were kids, right? Before you were around. I knew there was a rough patch. Daniels never really talked about it." "It was more than a rough patch," Renee said. "Dad had an affair, a real one, not a one-time thing. It went on for almost 2 years before Mom found out. She stayed for us, honestly. For a long time she was furious about that decision, like she'd given up something to hold the family together, and nobody even noticed." "Okay," I said slowly. "But what does that have to do with me and Daniel?" "Because Daniel was engaged before you, sort of. Not officially, but close. This girl Ashley, back when he was 26. Everyone loved her. Mom loved her, thought she was perfect for him. And then 2 months before he was going to propose, Ashley left him for someone else, completely out of nowhere. Mom took it almost harder than he did, honestly. She kept saying she should have seen it coming, that she'd let herself believe everything was fine when it wasn't." I sat with that for a second, feeling something shift in my understanding of the whole situation. "So when she says I've seen this before," I said slowly, "she doesn't mean me. She means believing something is solid and then watching it fall apart anyway." "Yeah," Renee said quietly. "I think that's exactly what she means. I don't think it's about whether she likes you. I think it's about whether she trusts herself to know the difference anymore between something real and something that just looks real." I hung up the phone that afternoon feeling something I hadn't expected to feel after 2 weeks of building quiet resentment toward this woman. I felt sad for her, but it didn't answer the real question yet, not the one that mattered most. Whether Carol actually believed our marriage was one of the ones that would fall apart too. I thought about that conversation with Renee for almost another week before I decided I needed to talk to Carol directly. Daniel didn't love the idea when I brought it up. "Just let it go," he said. "She loves you. I know she does. Why stir this up?" "Because I can't spend the next 40 years wondering if she's waiting for us to fail," I said. "I'd rather know now." He didn't argue after that. I think some part of him understood I was right, even if he didn't want to be the one to open that door. I went to see Carol on a Tuesday afternoon, when I knew Daniel's dad would still be at work and Daniel himself was tied up at the office. I told her I just wanted to stop by, which wasn't entirely a lie. I didn't want to stop by. I just also wanted something else. We sat at her kitchen table with tea neither of us really drank. I let her talk for a while first, about the wedding photos that had come back, about a book club she'd joined, small normal things. Then, during a lull, I said it before I could talk myself out of it. "Can I ask you about something I heard from the wedding? Someone told me they overheard you say something to Aunt Diane. About hoping you were wrong this time." Carol's face didn't collapse the way I half expected. It went very still instead, the way people go still when they've been caught holding something they'd hoped to carry alone forever. "Who told you that?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "It doesn't matter who. I just need to know if it's true, and if it means what I think it means." She was quiet for a long moment, turning her mug slowly on the table, not drinking from it. "I didn't mean for you to hear that," she finally said. "Not because I was hiding something ugly, because I didn't want you carrying something that isn't yours to carry. I think I get to decide what's mine to carry," I said, gently as I could manage. "Especially if it's about my marriage." She told me, then, in pieces, some of it matching what Renee had already told me, some of it new. About Daniel's father's affair, the years she spent smiling through family dinners while quietly deciding whether to stay. About Ashley, the almost fiancé, and how convinced Carol had been that she was watching her son finally get the life she'd always wanted for him, only to watch it fall apart with no warning at all. "I've spent my whole life being the person who believes things are fine right up until they aren't," she said. "I did it with my marriage. I did it with Daniel and Ashley. And then I stood in that receiving line at your wedding, watching everyone so happy, and some part of me, some ugly, tired, scared part of me, just thought, I hope I'm not doing it again. I hope I'm not smiling my way through another thing that's going to break." "That wasn't about me," I said slowly. It was never really about me. No, Carol said. And for the first time I saw her eyes actually fill, not the performed emotion of a wedding toast, but something rawer than that. It was about me not trusting myself anymore. You've done nothing but love my son well since the day I met you. I know that. I've always known that. I just don't know how to stop bracing for impact. It's the only thing that's ever kept me from getting blindsided. I sat with that for a long moment. I thought about Jenna in that hotel room, about all the nights I'd spent quietly recataloguing every warm gesture Carol had ever made toward me, wondering which ones were real. I understood, finally, that the question had never really been whether Carol's love was genuine. It was whether her fear was bigger than her love, at least in that one unguarded moment at the bar. I don't need you to promise everything's going to be perfect, I told her. I don't think anyone can promise that. But I need you to actually be in this with us. Not just bracing for it to end before it's even had a chance to start. Carol reached across the table and took my hand, the same way she had at that dinner weeks earlier. Except this time, I didn't feel the urge to catalog it. I want to be in it, she said. I'm sorry it took hearing that sentence for you to make me say so out loud. I told Daniel everything that night. The affair, Ashley, the years his mother had spent quietly bracing herself for every good thing to eventually collapse. He was quiet for a long time after I finished, staring at the kitchen counter like he was seeing his whole childhood rearranged in front of him. I knew about the affair, he said eventually. I didn't really know how much it did to her. I don't think I ever asked. Maybe you should, I said. Not tonight, but sometime. He nodded slowly. Then he looked at me in a way he hadn't since Portugal. Like some tension he'd been quietly holding onto for weeks had finally let go. I'm sorry I didn't just tell you everything from the start, he said. I think part of me didn't want to admit my mom wasn't as okay as she looks. I get it, I said. I don't think anyone in this family is as okay as they look, including me some days. He almost laughed at that, the first real laugh either of us had managed in weeks. Welcome to marrying into this family, he said. A little late for the warning, I said, but noted. Things didn't fix themselves overnight, and I'm glad they didn't, honestly, because I don't think I would have trusted it if they had. Carol and I started talking more. Really talking, not the surface-level warmth from before. She told me things about her own marriage she'd never told anyone outside her closest friends. I told her things about my own fears going into this, the ones I'd never said out loud to Daniel, even about whether I was capable of the kind of steadiness a marriage actually requires. A few months later, at a regular Thursday dinner, Carol pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was drying dishes, and she was putting leftovers away. I watched you and Daniel tonight, she said. The way you two argued about that stupid parking situation and then just laughed about it 2 minutes later. It wasn't that funny, I said, smiling. That's exactly my point, Carol said. You didn't need it to be funny. You just let it go because it wasn't worth holding on to. She paused, drying her hands on the towel slowly. I don't think I'm scared anymore. Not the way I was. I hugged her then, and it felt different than every hug before it. Not performed, not something either of us was doing for an audience. Just two people standing in a kitchen, finally being honest with each other. Later that night, driving home with Daniel, I looked out the window and thought about that hotel room the night of our wedding. Jenna's careful voice, the sentence that had unraveled everything I thought I understood about that day. I used to think finding out what Carol said had ruined something. Now I understood it had actually saved something instead. It forced all of us to stop performing a version of family that looked perfect from the outside and start building one that could actually hold up under pressure. Marriages don't start the day you say your vows. They start the first time something real gets said out loud, even when it's messy, even when it comes from somewhere you didn't expect. Ours started, I think, in a hotel room at 1 a.m., with a bridesmaid who was brave enough to tell me the truth instead of letting me walk into my marriage believing a version of that day that wasn't entirely real.